Hi, this is Dr. Eric Fields. I'm a psychologist specializing in gambling addiction. Today, I am talking about the solution for gambling addiction. Now, there are many solutions for gambling addiction, and they're all very, very individualized and customized. And that's exactly how they should be because we can't put people with gambling addiction in a box. They are individuals, and their solution is going to be person specific, right? Specific for their exact issues. Not every person with gambling addiction gambles for the same reasons. And many people with gambling addiction compulsively gamble because of many reasons. The solution I am talking about today is really one solution or one type of solution. And this solution comes from solution focused therapy, which was created by Steve DeShazer and Ingso Berg. Solution focused therapy and their strategies and techniques are very, very unique in that they do not focus that much on the problem. And I'm such a big fan of this therapeutic orientation because I myself have found that you can only focus on this negative compulsive gambling behavior for so long until you hit a wall, right? Because there's only so many different strategies you can come up with to help people surf urges, combat urge thoughts, um, avoid triggers, try to change the way that they're thinking about gambling, minimizing the positives or the benefits of gambling that they at least perceive are the benefits. Cognitive behavioral therapy, which I'm basically talking about here, is an excellent approach. It's got tons of research behind it. But if you're only utilizing that approach, you may very well hit a dead end eventually, especially for people with the more intractable kinds of gambling addictions. So if somebody is not as caught up in the throes of this addiction, or it's a mild addiction for them, or even just that it's problematic and en route to becoming a dependency, cognitive behavioral therapy absolutely can be sufficient. But I work with a whole range of people, and a lot of the people that come to me have a more serious, intractable kind of gambling addiction. And they come to me because I am an expert in this, and I've been doing this for a long period of time, and I know a lot about it. And so when people get that desperate, they want help from somebody that is really going to understand them and can really be effective for them. And so, in order for me to be effective for a lot of people who have serious gambling addiction, I have learned that I have to be diverse in my treatment. And so, while I definitely do my fair share of cognitive behavioral therapy, I also do a lot of psychodynamic work, which is more depth oriented, really getting to unconscious thoughts and drives, which a lot of times they're not aware of. And I help them figure that out. And that's a discussion for another day. And then there is this orientation that I really, really love. So, what is solution focused therapy? Well, I just kind of alluded to before that it doesn't really focus so much on the problem, which is very unique. It focuses on non problematic behavior. Okay. And so, what we're basically looking at is whatever kinds of positive behaviors they're doing in their life right now, we're going to call that success, right? And so basically, what we're trying to do is build off of those successes. And while solution focused therapy doesn't really coin this term, this is one that I use a lot. We want to crowd it out. And what I mean by that is the more positive behaviors you're doing in a given day, the less you're doing gambling, right? And of course, the best kind of behaviors are incompatible behaviors. And those are behaviors that, if you're doing them, you can't possibly be gambling, right? Like, for example, if you were actually playing sports rather than watching them and betting on them, right? You couldn't gamble at the same time as being actively involved in participating in sports, okay? So that's just one example. But the more your day is filled with non-gambling behavior and positives behavior, or even neutral behavior, not everything you do has to be positive. It could just simply be distracting and filling up time. And especially early on in recovery, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Now, a lot of the people I work with are so consumed by gambling that there is very little positive behaviors that they're doing in any given day. Now, of course, if you're doing anything positive, we can build off of that, but circumstances may prevent you from doing so much of something, right? You could stay longer at work and put more energy into your job, but there's a limit to that. You can do different kinds of sporting activities, but there's just so much you can do with that, or exercise, right? Can't be at the gym 3 hours a day. And so, there can be a limit to what positive behavior you can engage in at any given time. Okay. And like I said, a lot of the people that come to me for help, are not engaging in a whole lot of positive behaviors. And so one of the biggest issues is they can't even conceive of what they would be doing if they weren't doing this. And that is a question that I often start off treatment with. This is a very fundamental question that I really ask everyone at one point or another, which is, if you weren't gambling, if gambling wasn't in your life, what would you be doing? Gambling, when you're addicted, takes up so much time. If you look at your day like a pie chart, right? Then there would be a slice for work, there would be a slice for chores or household responsibilities, there would be maybe some slice for socialization. Maybe if you are already exercising, there's a slice for that. And then there would be this huge slice for compulsive gambling. And I'm not just talking about your actual gambling behavior. I'm also talking about time spent obsessing about gambling, time spent after gambling and feeling very guilty and badly about it, and just kind of laying in bed thinking over and over and perseverating about how bad this situation is for you and how much money you've lost, right? The brooding, time spent because of the consequences of gambling, like dealing with collection agencies or trying to move money from one account to another to cover losses and what have you. Time spent keeping it hidden from others, or lying about your behavior. That's a huge slice of the pie. And so, if we just get rid of your gambling, this is why a lot of people do not succeed in Gamblers Anonymous, right? Because Gamblers Anonymous will tell you, right, all about not doing this behavior and avoiding this behavior and avoiding anything linked to this behavior. For example, if you're a sports gambler, not watching sports, et cetera, et cetera. So they will tell you a lot of what you shouldn't do, but they don't really tell you much about what you should do instead. I think the extent of what they tell you should do really is go to more meetings, right? Anonymous groups famously, really kind of encourage people to just fill their time with meetings. And while that can be fine for the short term because it's a distraction and it's definitely keeping the consequences in the forefront of your mind and the reasons why you want to stay away from them in the forefront of your mind, at the end of the day, you're doing this behavior to fulfill some kind of need, to fill a void, right? And GA meetings are not going to ultimately fill that void. What's going to fill that void is what is really going to be inspiring to you, what's going to be, something that's going to make you passionate, something that you're going to um, really embrace and get into and find, help you find meaning in your life, right? Something that capitalizes on your potential, brings out the best version of yourself. I tell everyone that comes to see me that gambling addiction is a poor substitute for the real thing. And the trick is to figure out what the real thing is. And so a lot of people that come to me with gambling addiction, severe types, they don't even know, they can't even conceive of what life would be like without that gambling addiction. And so, what we have to then do is we have to use a future oriented and a past oriented perspective to help them figure it out. A present centered approach is not going to be helpful because presently they are consumed by this addiction and that's all they know, right? So that's not going to, the answers don't lie in the present. The answers lie in the future and the past. And what do I mean by that? I ask them to think back in the past when they weren't addicted to gambling. How did they spend their time? What were you doing instead of gambling? There's 24 hours in the day. If we take out 8 hours for sleep approximately, and 8 hours for our job approximately, there's still 8 hours left, right? That time has to be accounted for by something or some things, right? So what were you doing? And then if you think about even before you had a job, maybe gambling has been around since the time you first started your career or your job, right? So think back even further beyond that time. Okay? Now you're not working and maybe you're in school and that's taking up some time, but it's probably not taking up 8 hours a day. So you had even more time back then. So what the heck were you doing with all that time? If you were gambling in college, let's go back further. In high school, when you were a kid, what were you passionate about? What did you do? What did you enjoy doing? It is not as important at this stage to figure out the actual functions of your gambling or the reasons why you're gambling, what it's actually substituting for. What is very important though is to figure out what activities or interests you could be pursuing when you're not compulsively gambling. And in order to get some ideas for that, sometimes we have to go way back into our childhood to remember what really excited us, what we really, really enjoyed. I have not done creative writing in many, many, many years. Not since I want to say, geez, probably elementary school or middle school really was the last time I did any kind of creative writing. Okay. And so if I had some kind of dependency or issue, right, then I would want to go way back when and try to find things that I was really passionate about. And if I wind up going back as far as elementary school, I'm going to realize that creative writing was a real passion of mine. And that could be the solution if I had some kind of addiction or dependency. Okay? Now, a future oriented lens is very, very important as well. And so the solution focused approach famously uses this vignette to help people discover a possible solution for them, and maybe one that they've never done before. Okay? And so they ask a question or present this vignette like this. If you had a magic ball, 5 years from now, if you were not addicted to gambling anymore and you were not gambling anymore, or if you were, it was at a very responsible level, and so therefore it was a very small sliver of pie in your daily life, right? What would you be doing? Okay? And they ask the question in terms of behavior because that's very concrete. Like if I say like, what's your life like in 5 years? I may get some very general or vague answers like, oh, it's enjoyable. I feel good about myself. I'm happy. I'm married. I have a kid. I have a good job. But if I ask it in very behavioral terms and I say, okay, but what are you actually doing on a day-to-day basis? Like, what does that look like? That really gets you to start thinking about specifics. What am I doing? Maybe you've taken up martial arts and you're going to the dojo or your martial arts class very religiously, and you've made a bunch of friends from there, and that's a big part of your life. And maybe you're also writing a book because that's something you've always wanted to do, and so you're doing that. And now you're in a management position at your job because you've really excelled at work now that this gambling addiction doesn't take up so much time. And you have, X amount of employees that work under you, and you're heading an exciting project or team that's basically, doing this, and that, right, for the company, and that's something you're really passionate about. And you have a wife and a kid, and you guys take vacations every month or every couple months. And on the weekends, you like to go to the park and spend time and go out to dinner and specifics. What does that dream life look like for you? And so, if you think about it, with these two perspectives, they're not considering that you're doing any of this now, right? Like if it's the past perspective, it's that's something you did and you're not doing now anymore. And the future perspective, this is something you could be doing, but you're not doing right now. Okay? And so getting an idea for what life would look like without gambling from either perspective, what life would look like without gambling now in the present, okay, that's the beginning of the solution. And then we're going to start doing some of that now, right? You used to play sports as a kid, and that's what you loved. Let's start getting that back into your life now. You want to get that promotion at work. Okay, what kinds of things right now can you start to do to make that happen? Okay, and so again, we don't necessarily have to be at this stage finding what the gambling addiction is substituting for, finding the quote real thing, right? All we really have to do is find things that we can be passionate about and can crowd out this gambling addiction. Because the more we're doing these things, right, the more we're focused on these positive activities, these fulfilling activities, the less we're focused on the gambling addiction. And so that slice of pie, the more we do these other behaviors, becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. Or if you can get to a point where you're able to abstain from the gambling addiction altogether, you have all this time. And so now all these activities can fill in that time. Because if you don't fill in that time that your gambling addiction took up, it's going to be like a vacuum. It will suck you back in because you'll be looking around at the four walls in the room that you're sitting in, and you'll say to yourself, what the heck do I do with all this time? You need to fill the time. And the answer to how you fill the time lies in your past and your future. And listen, it's not just the past and future that can give you some inkling as to what you can do. You might be doing some behaviors right now that are positive that you can do more of to kind of help, close that gap, right? But I would probably say if you're so caught up in your gambling addiction right now, your world really revolves around that. And there probably aren't so many activities that you can really create and build off of right now. If there are, that's great. But to really crowd this out, you're going to need to look to the past and to the future for the real answers, because that's going to be the solution. Ultimately, the solution, as per solution focused therapy, for getting rid of this gambling addiction. And like I said, the beauty of this approach is that we don't need to worry about the actual addiction and trying to deal with that, because the more we get excited about these other areas of our life, the less this gambling addiction is being emphasized. And that's certainly not to say that you only should be doing this approach, because you do need strategies and skills to deal with urge thoughts, cravings, etc., especially in the beginning. Okay? But the main focus of this episode is looking at the bigger picture that's ultimately going to crowd out the gambling addiction. This is Dr. Eric Fields. I hope you found this helpful, and I will have more to say about this at another time.